Hi, my name is David Kelsey, and today I'll be discussing valid and sound arguments. Valid arguments are defined as those in which it's the case that if the premises are all true, then the conclusion must be true, and necessarily so. The conclusion cannot be false if the premises are in fact true. The basic concept behind validity in valid arguments is the idea of the necessary connection. What we say is that with valid arguments, there is a necessary connection between the premises of the argument and its conclusion. What this means is that the conclusion of a valid argument has to follow from its premises, but not only that, it's the only possible conclusion that could follow from the premises of the argument. Okay? And to explain validity, then, we will look at a couple of examples. So the first example we'll look at is the Socrates is mortal example. So the Socrates is mortal example says, Socrates is human and all humans are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. You should be able to see the necessary connection here, and you'll notice that if you think about the premise Socrates is human and that all humans are mortal, it has to follow that Socrates is mortal. Not only that, though, the conclusion that Socrates is mortal is the only possible conclusion that could follow from those two premises. It's not that I can conclude from the premise that Socrates is human and that all humans are mortal, that, for example, I'm mortal or you are. It's not that I can conclude Barack Obama is mortal, or that I like soccer, something completely irrelevant to those premises, or that I'm a college professor, or anything else for that matter, right? Because the premises aren't about those things. And so the only possible conclusion that could follow from those premises is, in fact, that Socrates is mortal, and that is why the argument is valid, and that is the idea of the necessary connection between the premises and conclusion. Okay? The next example we'll use to explain validity and necessary connection is the Barack Obama example. So the Barack Obama example says, one, Barack Obama is a robot, right, which is in fact false, right? And then two, if Barack Obama's a robot, he cannot be the president. Right? That one's probably true. But then from those, it has to follow again necessarily that Barack Obama cannot be the president. Again, this is the only conclusion that could possibly follow from those premises, that Barack Obama cannot be president. It's not that I could conclude, for example, that Hillary Clinton cannot be president, or, for example, Donald Trump couldn't be, or I couldn't be, or anybody else for that matter. It's not that I can conclude something irrelevant entirely, again, about soccer or about college or anything else for that matter, because this particular example, the premises are about Barack Obama and robots and about presidents, right? And so the only thing that could follow is that Barack Obama cannot be the president, and that's why the argument is valid, and that's why we have this necessary connection between those premises and the conclusion. Okay. So the final example we'll look to explain validity is the moon is made of green cheese example. This one is all a bit absurd, of course, and that's a bit of the beauty about the example, but you can see in this example the necessary connection quite clearly. So the example goes, one, the moon is made of green cheese. Of course, that's, absolutely absurd and ridiculous and false. And then two, all things made of green cheese orbit the earth. Again, that is, something that is absurd and false and so on. And then from those two, it actually follows the true claim that the moon orbits the earth, which is really interesting. And we can see again here that this conclusion that the moon orbits the earth is the only possible conclusion that could follow, right? It's not that I could conclude, for example, that the earth orbits the sun, or that Jupiter has, moons that orbit it, or anything else. It's not that I can conclude anything else about our solar system, for that matter, right? It's only possible to conclude that the moon orbits the earth from those two premises, and that's exactly why the argument is valid and also has that necessary connection between the premises and the conclusion. Okay, so the puzzle metaphor would be our next tool to explain validity. This is actually, I think, a beautiful metaphor to explain validity because it captures really the essence of the idea of the necessary connection. So imagine, if you will, that a valid argument is the entire argument we can take as one of these jigsaw puzzles, right? So my son, for example, he loves to build these jigsaw puzzles, right? And my grandparents used to love to do that, right? They have lots and lots of pieces, and then you make, sort of picture out of the pieces, right? Well, imagine that this is a metaphor to explain the idea of validity, right? So you can think of the puzzle, the whole puzzle itself, as the argument, analogous to the argument, and then the idea is that the puzzle, for example, imagine that there's only one missing piece to the puzzle, right? And in fact, there's only one possible piece to complete that puzzle, right? And there's only one piece that has the precisely right shape and image on it to complete that jigsaw puzzle. Now, analogously, the premises of the valid argument are likened to the puzzle missing that final and one final piece to complete it, right? And then analogously, the conclusion of the argument is that one final missing piece, okay? And so the idea is that there's only one possible piece that could complete the jigsaw puzzle. There's only one piece that has precisely the right shape and precisely the right image to complete the puzzle. And so only one piece will do, right? And this is exactly how the conclusion of a valid argument connects to the premises of that argument, right? The conclusion is the only piece that will do. It's the only piece that has the right shape and the right image to complete the puzzle, right? And so this is sort of exactly like analogously to the idea of a valid argument, okay? The last concept we'll discuss for this video is the idea of a sound argument. So a sound argument is just a valid argument first, right? And it's also got all true premises. And so when we have, as we saw with valid arguments, when we have a valid argument true premises, it has to follow that the conclusion is true. So actually, the conclusion of a sound argument is true as well. So a sound argument is one in which we have validity, and then we also have true premises and a true conclusion. So sound arguments are, if you will, kind of ideal. They are a kind of perfect argument. The reasoning is just right and everything is true, right? So a couple examples to explain soundness then. The first one is the dreaming example. So the dreaming example says either I'm making this video right now or I'm dreaming it, right? That seems to be true. Secondly, I'm not dreaming that I'm making the video, and so therefore it follows that I'm making this video right now. We can see all of the premises true here, right? It is true that either I'm making the video right now or I'm not, and then it's also true that I'm not dreaming it, so therefore, you have this true conclusion that I'm making the video right now. You can also as well see the necessary connection between the premises and conclusion in that argument, right? Because if it's true that either I'm making the video right now or I'm dreaming it, but then of course it's not true that I'm dreaming it, then it would have to follow that I'm making the video right now. So we have that necessary connection. So we have a valid argument with true premises and a true conclusion, okay? Lastly, the Super Bowl example we'll use to explain validity and soundness as well. So this is another valid argument with true premises and a true conclusion, so it is sound, right? So here's our Super Bowl example. This happens to be about the Super Bowl that happened in 2016. So the Broncos, the first premise is the Broncos won the Super Bowl in 2016, which we know to be true. And then secondly, if a team loses a playoff game, they cannot win the Super Bowl. That, of course, is also true, right? They have to win all their playoff games to win the Super Bowl. And then lastly, what has to follow, what necessarily follows, is that the Broncos didn't lose a playoff game in 2016. Also happens to be true. And so we have here a valid argument with true premises and a true conclusion, which happens to be sound. All right. Okay, so that will do it for the lesson on sound arguments and valid arguments. I hope you enjoyed the lesson and the video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.